Chuck Fresh from Computer Care. Now, I get this question a lot, and it's really kind of breaking taboo to talk about this, but I'm going to do it because I love you guys. I thank you for subscribing, watching this stuff, liking it, and telling your friends about it. So let's give you the truth. Now, people have asked me, I want to build a workstation computer versus a gaming machine. So you can pick up pretty much a gaming machine off the shelf of any big box store right now, and they're pretty affordable. You can find them online too on the online sales. They come across my desk every day, and some of them are pretty amazingly priced. Now, people ask me all the time, is it worthwhile if I'm a creative professional, meaning if I make movies, if I shoot videos, I want to do animations, I want to do maybe like 3D stuff or multi-track audio or AI, AR, pretty much anything that's really, really computational heavy in the creative space. Should I get a workstation versus a gaming computer? Will I really be able to notice a difference? And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Workstations versus gaming machines for creative professionals. Now, I'm a creative professional. I make movies. We do some animations here, and we do a lot of multi-track audio editing as well. I'm a professional voice actor. So, yeah, I have the same paddle that you do. I'm like, what should I do? Should I buy this gaming computer, or should I spend a few extra bucks and get this workstation? Well, what are the advantages? That's what we're going to talk about here. 3 of the big advantages of workstations over gaming machines. And then I'll tell you what I did. You probably already know. So yeah, you can Google all this stuff, right? Workstations versus gaming computers. And you're going to end up with these geeky computer professionals where some socially awkward dude is going to like spin all these crazy words that you will never understand or never need to know. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to try to explain technology and it just never works, right? So he'll probably try to impress you with all these terms of the overwhelming bunch of crap you'll never need to know, and you'll fall asleep because he's boring. So here's the real story. What you need to know about what's available. We'll talk about the processor, memory, CPU options, and, video cards. So there's always the argument, and this is, I'll tell you what I did later, but the price versus obsolescence. And what does that mean? Means I can pay a little bit less now and upgrade my computer maybe in a year from now. And some people have the flexibility to do that. I have the flexibility to do that. I've licensed all my software. I pay for everything I use. Some people don't do that. They've got hacks or cracks installed by their friend down the street or their local computer guy, and it's going to cost too much, or he won't do it again, or he lost the software, all these other reasons that maybe you can't get that software installed again. Sometimes companies will license specialty software for you, but it's only for that machine, and they tell you when that machine dies, technically it's licensed to the motherboard. And once the motherboard dies, you have to buy a whole new license. And in some industrial situations, which I've actually seen and worked at, that's an expense, a huge expense. So in that case, you probably want to get the most reliable, most expensive, not always the most expensive, doesn't always mean the most reliable workstation you can get. But the question is, for most people, for the average person, should you spend a little less now and upgrade more frequently? Well, it depends, because your time has value, so reliability is a fact for sure. So this video will give you a little bit more insight into that. And if you're one of these guys that actually know that Turing TU102 GPU architecture's tensor codes have been enhanced with new INT8 and INT4 precision modes, you're in the wrong place, Jeffrey. This is a consumer high-level description for non-nerds. So before you flame me, find another video. You're probably not going to find the intricate little details that you want from some geeky nerd here, okay? So let's talk about processors first. You know, AMD offers some pretty nifty, really nice Ryzen processors, right? And Apple just recently got in the game too. It's supposed to be a real good deal. But the big dog in PCs is still Intel. So let's focus on Intel for this video. And if we have enough requests for the other ones, we'll talk about those in a separate video. We don't have time, and time is of the essence. We got to get this thing done quick. All right. So the most common questions we get when creating a workstation versus a gaming computer is what people even want these for their gaming computers. What should I get? Should I get the Xeon processor or the i7 or i9? And they ask me all the time, for the casual video editor workstation user, is Xeon really better? What's the difference between the Xeon and an i7, i9? So let's break down a few of the characteristics of each processor family. So the Intel Core i5, i7, i9 series are mass-produced. And as you know, supply and demand, the more you make, the cheaper they are. So And you know that the latest generation is always going to be a little more expensive against supply and demand, fewer supply and more demand. And you know how to play that game, right? So is it worth the price to get the latest, super, super latest and greatest of processors just hit the market? Is it really worth the price? And are you going to get that much better performance? To be honest, in my experience, it's really unnoticeable. The advantages of the super greatest, latest, most powerful processor versus the last generation, I haven't been able to personally notice a difference in what I do. Now, you may notice something else depending on your software. It really depends on your software, the characteristics of what you're doing, and the way you do it. So it's really hard to really just qualify that in any one straight answer. So, but for me, I can tell you, I can't tell the difference between a generation. Now, 2, 3 generations, absolutely, you'll notice a difference there. But one generation, probably not. Unless you're the kind of guy that screenshots your performance benchmarks and you brag about it on social media. So that maybe you want to be the latest and greatest. If you got money to burn, hey, bring some over here. But for normal gamers and creators, the last generation, the previous generation is usually a great buy. You're going to save a few bucks, 50 to $100, and hey, it might be worthwhile, right? Now, some of the unlocked, this is a new big thing now, the unlocked i5, i7, i9 processors designed to be overclocked. So you can do little software tweaks and then run a little more voltage through these bad boys, and they can run at higher clock speeds than what they're advertised at. So it's tricky and it's a little risky, but that means a little extra power for your money. Xeon processors can't do that. You can't overclock a Xeon. And there's reasons for that, and we'll tell you that in a bit too. So most of the Core i7, i9, i5, I'm not sure if the i9s do. I'm pretty sure they do come with onboard graphics, meaning video processing is built right into the chip. So if you're doing just basic office stuff, spreadsheets, word processing, watching Netflix or something, you really don't need a separate video card if you're doing that type of work. But the Xeon processor-based PCs will need separate dedicated video cards. So that's another card you'll need to put in your system. But if you're doing kind of office work, Xeon's kind of overkill for you for the most part, unless you're doing some stuff we'll talk about in a bit. So what is this Xeon thing? It's spelled Xeon. Now, these are the processors or CPUs, central processing units in the workstations meant for creators and producers. They're built differently with different components, and they have something called a little more L3 cache, C-A-C-H-E, and that's it's a little onboard memory. There's actually memory built into the chip that's useful to speed up certain applications or processes when the software knows how to take advantage of that. Now, the Xeon processors close to double their i7 equals in this cache memory, but that gap's closing as we go over time. They're starting to level out. There's a lot to learn about the cache thing. Do you really need to know about L1, L2, L3, arrays, vectors, and all this other stuff? You probably don't, but if you want to look it up, a billion places online to find it. Best place to go is to the chip manufacturers themselves. Go right to the Intel website and look it up. Now, the thing about cache is it can help certain programs run a little faster if they're optimized to take advantage of these caches. And you can look up the software you go look for Adobe or whatever you're using. You can see if your latest version of software uses L3 cache, if it's really optimized to do that, and it could give you a little performance boost there. So also this is kind of important. The Xeon processors offer support for ECC RAM. That's your memory. It's called Error Checking and Correction, ECC Random Access Memory. So this memory is a little different than your standard on-the-shelf or gaming computer memory because it has the ability to detect and correct some data corruption before it occurs. And this data corruption is what causes your program or system crashes. So video editing and rendering, for example, uses a tremendous amount of RAM memory. So ECC memory could detect some of those errors and result in a more stable performance. So if you've ever worked on a large video project, like a movie, editing a movie, I've done this, and your computer crashed and you forgot to save, well, everything you did in the last like 5 minutes or since your last save is gone. You got to do it all over again. So yeah, ECC in that case could save you hours of work. It's pretty reliable too. Of course, there's workarounds for the cheap person like me. If you learn how to save like a crazy man and you save like every 3 minutes every time you do something, you just learn to do this from trial and error, then those crashes won't hurt as much. But that's not saying that ECC is perfect, but the stats show that Xeons with error correcting memory are a lot more reliable. than your standard gaming machine. Also, you'll find Xeons with ECC memory in enterprise level servers at big companies. So they need to be super reliable, because if you got thousands of people working on these servers, then they can't go down. You're going to lose a lot of money when your business goes down. So you don't want to do that. So that's why they use Xeon. So the big guys are using Xeons with ECC. So if you use that as your benchmark, you want to use what Work's using, then you probably want to get a Xeon with ECC. Now, there is a slight performance bump when using ECC memory, but it's supposedly pretty small. Estimates are somewhere between 1 and 2% of your whatever you're doing, because your memory has to take some time to do that error checking. Still, it's important to know that you could lose a little bit of performance, but it should be made up in the clock speeds that we're seeing today, and it should be very, very unnoticeable. And Xeons will offer more processing cores and multiple CPU options. You can actually get a Xeon workstation with multiple individual Xeon chips. And then they share the processing, which means things could be really amped up and a lot faster. A lot of servers do this too, and a lot of video editing workstations on the professional level use this. So if you're doing some serious data crunching for like rendering finely detailed 3D projects, or data crunching for AI projects, and your applications require or can use as many CPU cores as you can get, then Xeon's going to be the way to go. And some of the newer Xeon scalable processors have as much as 24 cores in the chip itself, with the i9 tops out, I think, at about 18. But again, those are narrowing too, and that could end up equal in the near future, so keep an eye on that. So the Xeon processors are built and tested to handle heavier, more intensive loads, meaning more heating and cooling cycles. If you've watched some of my videos too, you learn that heat is one of the great destroyers in chips, because we're talking like super microscopic traces, little pieces of metal, and when you heat them, they expand, and when they cool off, they contract, and more of this, you do this a lot, they kind of break apart, and that's where things start to fail. Some of the traces start to break, and things won't work well, and things slow down and not even turn on at all sometimes. So the Xeons are built better. I guess it's a big secret. I don't know how they do this. Maybe they use more metal in the traces. Hard to tell, but it's been proven that they have more longevity over the i9 or i7 CPUs. And this is super important, again, if you're in a business or something that has very limited licensed software, meaning you can't transfer it to another computer or maybe even another chip, because chips have IDs too. So it really depends what you have. So if you need super, super ultimate reliability, and that's very critical for your business or whatever you're doing, then you're probably going to want to go Xeon. Xeon's probably the most reliable chip you can get, according to proven statistics, and you can look that up yourself too. So you want something rock solid for as long as possible, you probably want to get a Xeon, and you probably want to upgrade your motherboard, hard drive, and everything else too. Xeons do cost a little bit more, but that $50, $100, $200 bump for a serious workstation, for a serious workstation user or a serious creator, is probably no big deal, right? Now, there are memory speeds too, but these memory speeds, and I'm going to catch a lot of fire for this, they really aren't too notable for most serious workstation users. And we were talking nanoseconds. The memory speed is determined by the CPU, and the timings determine how fast your memory can respond to requests for performing whatever actions. You can look stuff, it's called CAS latency, or CL. There's a ton of arguments about that, but what's important to know is speed increases and latency decreases result in a little better system performance, a little faster system performance. So you can look that up individually, but for the ECC, it's really not going to be much of a big difference here if you're going down that road. All right, real quick, I'm going to finish up talking about graphics. Now, while your CPU, or central processing unit, your processor, your Xeon, your i7, your i9, your AMD Ryzen, whatever, it's a general purpose workhorse. It does a majority of your number crunching, and all computing is basically number crunching, all the way down to its base levels of zeros and ones, ons, offs, flicking switches, and we have a talk about that on the history of computers on this channel. While a GPU, a graphics processing unit, is going to be more specialized. So basically, your software instructs your CPU, your processor, to do whatever it needs to do, and then maybe if it's coded that way in the software, it'll say, hey, GPU, I want you to take care of this stuff while I'm doing all this. So it kind of splits the workload. And the GPU is going to calculate more math, like polygons, pixels, shaders, in 2 or 3 dimensions. So that's what it's for. It's kind of like you have 2 processors now. Well, the CPU is really the big dog. It's going to do all the heavy duty stuff, and your GPU is going to offload and handle stuff you can see on the screen. So in a workstation situation, what do you really need? Well, obviously, if you have a Xeon, you're going to need a graphics card. And I mean, really the most you can afford. I mean, the more you spend in this case, usually the better off you're going to be. So you can spend as little as $50 or as much as $5,000 on a graphics card, depending on its memory and abilities. So the important thing to realize is, or think about is, will that super expensive GPU complete your tasks or rendering fast enough to offset that cost so you can do more work and make more money? And it's kind of a tricky question. It's hard to tell unless you actually tested it. And unfortunately, there's no way to rent a system and compare those two. You can look at other people's benchmarks, but everybody does things a little bit differently. Maybe you're opening a browser in the background, doing some other work. You need to check your email while something's rendering, and that's going to affect your outcome. So very, very tricky question to answer. So let's talk about video editing, which is what I do, and a lot of people who watch the channel do. It's a pretty heavy duty task depending on how many filters, effects, color gradings, renderings, animations, or other things you use in that project. And to be honest, most of the video editing software still sends all its work to the CPU for the most part. Now, more recently, the big dogs like Adobe and Magix, they've gotten a little bit better at offloading some of the processing tasks to the GPU with something called GPU acceleration, and you have to select it. I think it comes default now in most of the later software. But does it make a big difference? In my opinion, man, maybe a minute or two shaved off a rendering, like a 30-minute project, isn't really, to me, worth thousands of dollars in upgrades. Do you know what I mean? So you can achieve the same results. Now, if you have this flexibility like I do, I can manage my time better too. So I do my long video rendering overnight while I'm sleeping. So if I have a big 2-hour motion picture I need to edit, I'm going to do all that stuff when I can during the day, get that all right. I'm going to render it at night. And by the time I wake up in the morning, it's almost done. So, you know, it's hard to say. It depends what you have going on and what kind of effects and stuff you have in there. Some animation rendering is going to be a little bit heavier, and some of the lifelike, like 3D CAD work or modeling work or training neural networks are definitely going to benefit from a more powerful workstation GPU. But again, it's really, the bottom line is if your software supports it. Not all software supports offloading some of the processing tasks to the GPU. But if it does, the time saved in those situations, maybe in your situation, might make the upgrade worthwhile. If you've got if you're at a workplace and you need a new workstation and they've got money to burn, if you're in defense industry, just, hey man, get whatever they're going to give you, right? Now the makers, we look at NVIDIA. NVIDIA makes a workstation card called the Quadro, and AMD makes something called a Radeon Pro. So people ask all the time, which one is better? Again, it depends on the software you're using and the latest specs. Now, some software companies actually will work hand in hand with NVIDIA or AMD, usually not both, to specifically calibrate their software with the hardware. So let's say, okay, NVIDIA, I'm going to work with you. I decided to make this deal with you. You're going to advertise us. We're going to handshake and exchange Super Bowl tickets, whatever. And they're going to optimize their software to either the NVIDIA or AMD platform. And it will make a tremendous difference if the software and hardware are working together and they're meant to work together and they've made some changes in their architecture so it does work together. Then there's definitely going to be a performance boost in one or the other. And again, you really need to look at your software manufacturer's website to see who they partnered with, see what it's optimized for, and that should be the decision in which side you go on, which side you want to play. I've heard that some of the Quadro cards made by NVIDIA have, actually they have ECC memory in them. So they have that error correcting stuff you're going to find along with the Xeon processors in some of the Quadro cards. So you're going to have less computational errors. Again, a little bit of a performance hit there, but less crashes. And that's really important when you're rendering a big project, especially if you have deadlines, stuff you have to get done the next day, and you rendered something overnight and it's not ready because your computer crashed. Yeah, that's not fun. So talking from experience, that's not fun. So it's nice to have error correcting memory in the Quadro cards too, but look it up too. I don't know if Radeon Pro has added that. At least recently, look at their websites and see what their specs are. In terms of reliability, There's a big difference in the professional workstation cards versus the gaming cards. Now, usually what happens is the gaming cards, they will send their chips to somebody else, and some idiot in China or whatever is going to make the card using their chip with their own quality processes. So NVIDIA or AMD has no control over what that card does. Now, in terms of the workstation cards, they're usually made in-house by NVIDIA or AMD. So they're going to use the highest quality because their reputation's on line here. And the warranty is going to be a little better. The manufacturing process is going to be a little better. And hopefully the longevity will be better too in the workstation cards made directly by the manufacturers who make the GPUs. And finally, the question we get all the time, well, if I spend all this money, this extra money on a workstation, can I still use it to game? And the question is absolutely yes. It's going to be overkill. I mean, you're going to pay more. If you're just using it for gaming, don't do this because you're going to waste a lot of money. It's going to be a little silly. But you can game on a workstation. Actually, the GPUs and the CPUs and everything's going to be probably a little bit more horsepower than you're going to get on your gaming computer, but you're going to spend a lot more for it. So don't buy these things to game. But if you want to buy a workstation, you're going down this road and you want to do the professional Xeon with the ECC memory and the workstation graphics cards, yes, you can absolutely game. Are you going to see a difference in performance? Probably not, but you're not going to see any better performance from a workstation than you would from a gaming computer either. So that's the bottom line. You're going to spend money for nothing if you're doing this to be a gamer. You know what I mean? But if you're creating stuff and you're gaming, then you got the 1-2 punch, and really the workstation is the way to go. Hey, if you got ideas or suggestions, put them in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe. Helps us out a lot. We'll make a whole lot more crazy videos on this channel. Chuck Fresh out.